Good afternoon, Santa Clara. I'm Mayor Lisa Gillmor. Thank you for joining us for Mayor at Noon. You will have an opportunity to ask questions live. As we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted many in the community. During the first 12 months of the pandemic, according to a study on pediatrics, the number of adolescents admitted to the hospital for severe illness from eating disorders increased significantly. The findings emphasized how profoundly the pandemic has affected young people who suddenly experienced school closures, canceled extracurricular activities, and felt social isolation. The lives of our youth were turned upside down, and the negative mental health effects of the pandemic could be particularly profound among adolescents with eating disorders. I am pleased today to introduce our viewers to Janice Bremis, Executive Director and founder of the Eating Disorders Resource Center. Janice graduated from San Jose State University with a BA in Liberal Arts and has worked in the healthcare community for most of her career. Janice was also diagnosed with an eating disorder in 1975. Through her own experience, she strives to provide emotional support and access to quality treatment for all of those who battle the disease. Thank you for joining us, Janice, and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for having me. It's so nice to be here and to have this opportunity to raise awareness among your viewers about eating disorders. We don't get that opportunity too often, so that was nice of you.
No, it's really an honor to have you here, and I look forward to sharing your experiences and your knowledge about what's happened. So let us start our discussion by watching a short video. So if we could cue that up, please.
It's time.
It's time.
30 million people suffer from it.
It has the highest mortality rate of any mental illness.
Every 62 minutes, someone dies from it.
Eating disorders are mental illnesses that affect all ages and races.
I nearly died from it.
I struggled as a teenager.
I was diagnosed at age 42.
It affects men too.
It is devastating to families.
Eating disorders are complex mental illnesses. If you or someone you know is struggling, we can help.
My sister sought help and is in recovery.
It is time to stop the stigma and shame once and for all.
Please contact us at 408-356-1212 or visit our website at edrcsv.org.
It is time.
Wow, that's a pretty powerful video. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Actually, the people in the video are all struggled with an eating disorder or a family member of someone who struggled. So it was made by real people.
So they're not actors, they're real people in that video.
Yeah, they're all real people. Yeah.
That's amazing. Why don't we start our discussion by telling us what is an eating disorder? I think there might be some preconceived notions out there about what an eating disorder is, or people may think it's just someone that has anorexia, but tell us about what is an eating disorder?
An eating disorder is a serious, complex mental illness. And usually people that are struggling with an eating disorder, you have certain behaviors. The main thing is that the person with the eating disorder is usually thinking about food all day. They're either restricting food or they're eating large amounts of food. They also have a lot of shame about their body. They feel that they may be too fat, they want to get thinner, or there's a lot of models that the young girls look up to that they want to be like that. And then there's bulimia, binge eating and anorexia. Anorexia is just the smallest percentage, but that gets
Is it the smallest percentage?
Yeah,
Anorexia?
1%.
Because that's
Yeah,
what I
yeah,
think most people
yeah.
know about.
And that's what's sad, because that's what people always talk about. Well, you know, my family, she's not anorexic, so she doesn't have an eating disorder. Well, she could be bulimic, she could be binge eating. You know, 6% have binge eating, 3% have bulimia, and just less than 1% have anorexia. So they're all serious, you know, anorexia, they're all serious. I think what people notice it more because you associate with thinness. But you can be obese and have anorexia, so it's just a misconception.
Okay, wow. What is the cause of eating disorders? And I know that's a sort of a loaded question, because there's probably so many things that lead up to it, but many people might think, oh, they have an eating disorder. It's all about the food. It's just about the food. And if they would just eat more food or eat less food, everything will be okay. So what are you seeing in your experience, some of the root causes of this?
Yeah. Well, we know that it's genetic. So we know that your biological determines your likeliness to get an eating disorder. Then we
So you don't catch it? You just don't catch eating disorder? It's something you're born with?
Yeah, you're predisposed to, you have a certain personality that's predisposed, just like if other depression runs in families, schizophrenia runs in families, just like that, it runs in families. And then, remind me what the question was.
The cause of it.
Oh, the cause, predisposed,
yeah.
So it's environmental, biological, social, psychological. It's a combination of everything. There is a saying that genetics loads the gun and environment pulls the trigger.
So, the environment, meaning like social media, could be one of those enablers.
Yes, exactly.
That help that.
Yeah, and cultural things and whatever's in the style right now. The fashion is to be this, or have gaps between your thighs. You know, that's what the young girls strive for. But we know that social media does not cause the eating disorder. It's just if you're predisposed and something happens. Usually I call it the 3 Ps. You're predisposed and then something happens. I call it a precipitating factor. So usually that number 1 is going clean eating, or going on a diet, or sometimes it's really something like just having your wisdom teeth pulled and you lose a little bit of weight, and then everybody says, oh, look at you, look so good. And then it keeps going. So then it perpetuates itself. So the goal is to treat the eating disorder early so that it doesn't become chronic.
Well, and we'll talk about the role of parents later, and maybe some of the signs that you could, pick up maybe at an earlier time period, like clean eating, or what
vegetarian, vegan.
Yeah, and what did I hear recently? I'm on the quarantine diet.
Quarantine 15. Quarantine
is that
15.
what they call
it?
Quarantine 15? I think I've seen that on social media.
Yeah.
On the quarantine diet, the quarantine 15, or these trends that move along that really encourage the kids to. And others, right? Yeah. But I think something that you said, that people tend to compliment you on when you've lost some weight, right?
Yeah.
Oh, you look so good. And this same thing happens with our young people too.
Yeah, and that's the same thing we were going to talk about boys, but a lot of times boys get complimented because they've worked out or they've gotten abs or bigger muscles, and it's reaffirming. They say, oh, we should keep doing that. So, our society kind of values thinness and values, Yeah,
it does. And I know we're going to talk about boys a little bit later on. But one thing in the video, there was one woman in there that said she was diagnosed in her, diagnosed in her 40s.
42,
Tell me about that, and seniors even that you and I had talked about that are having these eating disorder problems.
Yeah, it is. A lot of times they call it like a midlife kind of thing. Hers was diagnosed later because she was she was in charge of a church, and so she was always giving compassion to everybody. And then she started using food as a way to control, and to control situations and that. And so she developed it later in life, but she was predisposed to have it. It's just that what happened is she left the church, and that was what triggered it. So I always worry about if something happens in your life, like you get divorced or you move to another state or your kids go off to school, that can trigger it. So it can happen at any age. Most of the people that are older that have it, they've had it on and off for years. So
maybe they had it earlier, but it wasn't diagnosed until they're later?
Right. They had it earlier, but then they got married, had a family, and did really well, and they were, preoccupied with life, and then something happens, they lose their loved one, dies, and then they start coping by taking food and controlling food. And so that's...
Right. Now, I know that you actually have given me permission to talk to you about this, but can you tell us about your journey and what happened to you? And it started in the 70s, I think. And
sure.
If you don't mind, I know you said it was all right to talk about it. So.
Yeah, I was just graduated from high school and 17, and it was that summer. And I think my dad or someone said, "Oh, you're getting a little figure," because I was always like lanky, lean and lanky, and they called me Spider Woman. And so I said, "Oh, well, maybe I should lose weight." And my pants felt a little tighter. So I just decided, I told my mom, I'm going to go on a diet. And I started riding bikes, and each day I was eliminating more and more food. I started out with, reducing fat and all sugar. And I got to a point over the next 3 to 4 years where I had lost 85 pounds, and so I couldn't even walk. I couldn't stand up. And I was eating the same meal, every meal plan, because that's another thing, that there's a lot of OCD, and you want to...
Is that keeping control over your environment and focused on your food?
Right, and if you know what you're going to eat the same time, every day, when and where, then it's very soothing. And actually having anorexia can be empowering, because you feel like, every time you lose weight, you just get kind of like a high. Even though I've never taken drugs and I don't know how it feels to be high, but
like
it's a good
euphoria.
Yeah, euphoria, exactly. Yeah, so it's that. And so after about 4 years, and I was in the hospital twice, and I actually passed out in Macquarie Hall at San Jose State. I'll never forget it. And then my parents had to come pick me up. But they luckily, back in that time, they found one of the only researchers that was studying eating disorders. So I got admitted to her program in Iowa, the University of Iowa, where she was doing a study. She was testing a medication versus non-medication. So it was a blind study, so I don't know which one I was in. So thanks to that, I got treatment there for 4 months.
But your parents recognized it, what was happening to you. Did they recognize it for what it was?
I was going to the doctor for everything. They took me to enterologists, GI, everything, OB. They thought maybe it was, they couldn't figure out. They didn't know what it was. And then finally I went to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist said to my mom, well, I think she has an eating disorder. So it took a long time, though. And I think even today, sometimes parents don't recognize it right away.
So that's one of my questions. What is the first step to getting help, and the role of parents in all this?
I think the first step for anyone that has an eating disorder is to want to get help, to ask for help, or to tell someone. A lot of times people will be binge purging for years, and they hide it from their husbands, their kids, and they don't tell anybody, and so you can't really get help. And then the second step is to be screened for an eating disorder. So if you're a parent and you think your child might have an eating disorder, I would take them to the pediatrician, and they can test them, run different tests, x-rays, labs, test their blood pressure, and their potassium levels and amylase levels, and do that. And just to be aware of the red flags, too, that we were saying, like they're wearing bulkier clothes, or they're isolating in their room, or they're not eating meals with you, or they don't want to pack their lunch for school. They said, oh, I ate at school. So, or like using the bathroom after meals.
I had a friend in high school who we would have pizza, and I would eat one piece, and she would eat the rest of it. And then she would be in the bathroom, but I didn't know at the time what she was doing, but then I heard what she was doing. She was purging. And I remember being upset with her. Why, you know, we didn't have a lot of money back then. Why are you wasting our money by doing that? And I didn't understand the pain that she was, because nobody talked about it. Nobody explained what that was. And, you know,
And she probably didn't want to talk about it because she's embarrassed.
Oh, completely did not want to talk at all. She was ashamed of what she was doing, and I was too young to help her or to even understand, and or to even say, hey, let's go, you know, to an agency like yours to get help.
To get some help. There's a lot of stigma and shame about it, and it caused me to lose a lot of my friends, because, you know, they don't understand your behavior, and they see you shriveling away, or they see you purging, and they don't understand, when they don't know what to do.
But there's little signs even that start in the beginning that either friends or parents can notice about your child. We, you know, as parents, we see what our children are doing, or when things are just not quite right. But there seems to be like a cloak of shame around this type of, you know, it's a mental illness.
It's a mental illness.
And the parents don't want to admit it. The children don't want to get help. And so they just decide not to talk about it and ignore it. It'll go away. Just give them more food.
That's exactly right.
And I see a lot of that.
Yeah, the parents don't want to talk about it. Even once the child is in treatment, and the parents still are embarrassed by it. So I had a physician on our board, and she said, I was telling my neighbor that I was on your EDRC board. She goes, oh, both my daughters had an eating disorder. And they're friends and neighbors, and she didn't even know. But there's no reason to talk about it, so they don't talk about it. But I think parents can be aware of the signs, and, you know, they can get that from our website, and they can learn from us. Doctors need to be screening more for them, so that's one of our other goals, is to get because eating disorders affect every organ in the body, so all doctors need to be aware of it. Even OBGYN, sometimes being pregnant can trigger an eating disorder because you're fearful of gaining weight, and you know, or it could be the opposite. You could just say, oh, I'm going to gain weight, so I'm going to eat and eat and eat. You know, so there's a lot of different things. But yes, it's really important. And if you think someone that you know is struggling, then just ask them. Like the parent can say, well, is something going on, honey? You know, I noticed that you're not eating your lunch at school, you know, and they might just blow it off. But just to be kind of persistent on that, and just not to put any blame or anything, but just show real concern and real empathy.
Right. Not accusatory. So there seems to be a recent focus on young men, and people don't think that young men, or men in general at all, are plagued with eating disorders. But you did send me a Wall Street Journal article that was fascinating. So can you talk a little bit about the recent, I guess, exposure about this, and how it's been affecting our young men?
Actually, even in diagnostic criteria, one of the criteria is to lose your menses. So you're not diagnosed until you lose your menses. And boys don't have that. So recently they've changed it, so that's not part of the diagnosis. But I think for boys, it's, you know, there's a lot of social media, a lot of Instagram. They're seeing other peers, and peers are big influencers on how they look, how their bodies are. Oh, I want to get a six-pack, or oh, I want to build up my muscles. But
some are not built that way. They never will be that way. And
then once they start the behavior, like with me, it just started by an innocent diet. But it might be, we hear a lot of kids start by saying they're going vegan, or they'll say, oh, I don't want to eat animal cruelty. But that's just an excuse. They really want to control what they're eating, and they're trying to think of ways to help make their parents understand why they're doing this.
Yeah, and it may not be everyone that wants to go vegan, because vegan is very popular nowadays, and eating that way, but there's things that lead up to that. There's behaviors that can lead up to that. And then social media, that seems to be such a big influencer on these kids, and everyone in general, really. But I think people need to know that social media just enables, but it's not the cause.
It's not the cause, yeah.
It's not the cause of
yeah.
what's happening to these young men and women.
You're predisposed, you have the personality and the genetic traits, and then it's just the environment, and then something happens, and then that's how that person chooses to cope. Like some teenagers will choose to cope with alcoholism or substance abuse. But then others they'll choose to cope with restricting food or something evolving around their diet and what they're eating. A lot of times kids will start isolating, social isolation.
Can we talk about isolation, the pandemic, the last year and a half? Talk about isolation. What's happened to eating disorder during isolation? Tell us about that.
We got so many more calls. I had we normally get 3 calls a day. I was getting 6 to 8 calls a day, mostly all from parents. Most of them saying, well, our child is home from college, or they're not, and I didn't notice this, but now I'm noticing this behavior where she goes into the bathroom and she turns the shower on, and then we don't know what she's doing. Or they'll say, they'll just say that they notice their daughter maybe hiding food in the room, or just
odd behaviors around food.
But see, their whole life was disrupted. They can't go to school. They can't do outdoor activities. They don't see their friends. So their life is so disrupted that eating disorder is a way to control things. The number one thing I always say is eating disorder is all about control. It's really not about the food. It's about I can control what I eat and how much I eat, when I eat, that kind of thing. So and also there's always an underlying diagnosis like anxiety, depression. So the eating disorder is just the symptom. That's how they're soothing their anxiety.
But it's how they feel about themselves. Is that really what it all stems from, how they're feeling about themselves?
Yeah, usually people with eating disorders have a lot of inner self-hatred and they have a lot of self-hate. And so that's something that will lead you to set you up to get an eating disorder.
Well, and probably the isolation from the pandemic just really exasperated that.
And some, one mother said, oh, my daughter played tennis prior to the epidemic, and now she can't play tennis anymore, so she's gained some weight, so she's starting to, she says, I have to lose weight, So they were disrupted their normal routine, so, they're not playing outside and using the energy, using the calories, and so they're thinking about how they can reduce the weight.
So I think before we go to questions from the audience, I wanted to ask you a question about, I still can't get over why so many people don't want to talk about this, the shame of not talking about it, and maybe does that start in lack of education, like in our schools and our hospitals and wherever we're looking for help, that it's just not there.
Definitely.
To help us with this situation.
Definitely lack of education. And we have a student action council now that they part of their goals is we have a writing contest every year, and it's about how does social media, Instagram affect your self-perception. But they're actually now going out to other schools and educating other students. Because I think I was sharing with earlier that the schools will get they usually get a lot of information about bullying and how to eat healthy and, sexual abuse and drugs and alcohol. But like this one student called us and said, but nobody talks about eating disorders. And I think a lot of that is, even some of the eating disorder experts, they think, well, if you talk about it, then you're going to create it. If you talk about sex, they're going to have sex. If you talk about eating disorders, then they're going to start, it's that thing, let's not disturb anything.
Right.
But really, parents need to know, and PTAs are a great place for.
Right. There's no shame in it because it's happening to everyone that people we know.
Yeah.
Everyone is touched by this. They really, really are. So why don't we go to our audience, and then after I'm going to ask you about what's your call to action, and I know that you need volunteers and everything else. But let's go to the audience first. I think we have a couple questions, maybe a comment. Okay, here's one. What advice do you have for parents who suspect their child is having an eating problem? And that comes from Nancy.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think that's the number one call I get is from parents saying, I think my daughter might be having an eating disorder. I've noticed she's not taking her lunch to school, she's lost a little bit of weight, but I'm just kind of worried about her. So I just always suggest have them screened, take them to their pediatrician or to their medical doctor, and we have on our website, we have a list of all the x-rays, labs, and tests that the doctor can take to see, and all the right questions to ask. There's
So you're a great resource for a parent to just go to the website first, which we're going to show that at the end as well.
Definitely a good resource. And what's really good about EDRC is since our beginning, 2006, we've brought parents together and they meet every Saturday, and that's been the most valuable.
Parent support group.
Yeah,
wow,
that has been huge.
Really
it's
helpful.
kind of like parents helping parents, but it's like they feel so isolated when their kid has that illness because they feel like they're being blamed for it. Or I remember my neighbor told my mom, how come you're not feeding your doctor? How come you're not feeding your daughter? You're starving her. And then my mom got defensive.
Right.
And I think most parents do get defensive. They think if it's something they're doing wrong, but it's not.
It's not.
Yeah. So to talk to get her assessed by a doctor, maybe ask what's going on. Are you worried about something? Did something change at school? Maybe,
Okay, that's a good
ask
answer.
a lot of questions.
Great. We have another question here. Why can't parents get their medical insurance to cover treatment for their kids with eating disorders? From Teresa.
That's a huge challenge. There's lack of parity of care when it comes to mental health and physical health. And insurances are always ready to cover preventive and treatment. But for mental health, it's always been a little bit like, for a while there, you could only get 20 visits to see a therapist. But still, they do not recognize eating disorders as a serious mental illness, and they won't cover treatment. My friend was sharing, he's a director of eating disorder program, very well-known eating disorder doctor. And he said, my dear friend is in her 70s, and she's being treated for cancer with chemotherapy, and the chemotherapy costs thousands of dollars, and I can't even get $1,000 to cover weekly visits for this 17-year-old or whoever.
Right, and it's long-term, right? If you don't deal with it now, you're going to deal with it in so many other ways medically in the future.
It basically is one of the most costly illnesses to treat. And a lot of it is because it's not caught early. And it is very expensive. But yeah, I don't know, I'd say we spend like a third of our time filing appeals to the Department of Managed Care for whatever insurance, including Medi-Cal, Medicare, Kaiser, whatever insurance, and we appeal it because they're denying them. And 62% of the appeals are granted. So something's wrong when that,
wrong.
Steve Posner, who was the insurance commissioner, he said, Janice, 62% are overrided and they have to cover. So we're like, with this year, we did help for 2 that were on Medi-Cal, 1 in San Benito and 1 in Alameda, and then 2 that were on Kaiser. We appealed on their behalf so that they get the treatment they needed.
Well, thank you for doing that. We have a comment. Love you, Mayor and Janice, from Larry. Thank you, Larry. Larry's a longtime viewer. Thanks, Larry, for watching. So now I would like to, I'm sorry, time goes so fast. You have so many important things to tell us. I'd like to conclude with what your call to action is for our community, and tell us about the message you would like to leave us, and tell us what you need, because I know that your organization has a lot of needs. So first, tell us about the message. What would you like to leave us with?
I think the main message that I try over and over, and we participate in the National Alliance for Mental Illness, their NAMI walk every year. Eating disorders are a mental illness. They're not a choice. They're not choosing to have this illness. I would have never chosen to have anorexia. All the misery and all the pain it caused me and my family. So I want people to know that it's not a choice, that it's a serious mental and physical illness, and that you need to ask for help. And as far as how to help us, we're
Need money, I know that.
Yeah,
you
can
need money to the
donate.
organization and donations.
Yeah,
absolutely.
always donations, and we really do have a good team of volunteers. Our volunteers are from all over. Our Google person, he does AdWords, he's in India. One of them's in Canada, who does our website, and we have a lot of student volunteers. A lot of students don't get the information about eating disorders in their high schools or middle schools, so they choose that as a project. And sometimes high schools have volunteer hours where you have to do so many hours.
Right, most of them do.
Right, and so then they'll choose to come volunteer for us, and then they keep on volunteering the whole year. And some even actually, we mentor the student through the whole year and help them learn more about eating disorders. And interestingly, some of them even start to go into the field. They decide, well, I'm going to go become a psychologist, or I'm going to go into research. So yeah, so I would say our needs are, and education, if anyone wants us to come out and present.
That's a wonderful idea.
Yeah, educate.
For PTAs or schools,
yeah,
or
we can do that. Wednesday we went out to the largest Momentum for Mental Health. It's the largest provider of mental health services.
Right.
Yeah, and we trained 20 of their psychiatrists and doctors on how to recognize signs and symptoms. They wanted to know what medications work and along that line. So
well,
yeah.
even having our fraternal organizations, some of our nonprofits, having you in as a speaker to get the message out.
Yeah.
There is no shame in this. There is no shame.
Exactly.
And there's many people struggling, boys, girls, young, old, everyone that
I
is,
was really
especially through the pandemic.
Yeah, I was really surprised because several years back we were presented to the Rotary Club, and I asked how many people out there know of someone with an eating disorder, and I was surprised about the number of hands that raised, but they don't talk about it with their friends or family. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. You've been a fabulous guest, and you've given us so much information, and I know that we are going to be sharing your contact information for your organization. Thank you for sharing your personal story with us.
Sure.
I know you're a very, very brave person to do that, and it takes people like you to get this message out.
Yeah, to talk about it.
To help lives.
Yeah.
And our community.
To save lives. It's like turning adversity into advocacy. So something adverse happened to me, I had an eating disorder, and now I want to advocate for it.
Well, you're very admirable, and again, I have such wonderful appreciation for you and gratefulness for you to come on.
And actually, this show idea is really good that you're doing this, because there's not a lot of local cities that do shows like this.
Oh, well, thank you. We're cutting edge here in Santa Clara.
So that's
yes,
really
we
cool.
are. We're
so hooray
edge.
for Santa Clara. Hooray for the city of Santa Clara for thinking ahead.
Thank you so much. So that's all the time we have for Mayor at Noon. Join us next time. Until then, be well, Santa Clara.
So you boys wrote